Richie McGinniss has weighed in on the Kyle Rittenhouse saga. Josh Hammer on Twitter states, read past the headline and enjoy this fabulous piece of writing from Richie McGinniss. We're going to read it, and I'm going to show you why Richie McGinnis's writing is far from fabulous and how we can learn from that. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
So here is the article that Josh Hammer was gloating about. The headline itself is rather interesting. Now keep in mind, the writer of the article is not necessarily the headline writer, and in fact, most of the time that's not the case. And there's a reason for that. The copy editor has to be able to fit all of this thing into the confines of print, and he has to be able to do it at the very last moment. So there's not enough time to go back and forth with an author about what the headline should be. And therefore, the copy editor probably wrote this headline, and Richie McGinniss probably approved it. And in fact, on Twitter, as Shayna pointed out, Richie McGinniss has voiced similar sentiments. But let's go ahead and read it. I was in Kenosha 2 years ago. Kyle Rittenhouse is not a hero. And if I'm the copy editor, I think I would note that you have a grammatical mistake here. And it centers on the use of the comma in the headline. I was in Kenosha 2 years ago is an independent clause. Kyle Rittenhouse is not a hero is an independent clause. They should be separated by a semicolon, but maybe semicolons aren't used in headlines. I don't know. I don't write for this particular type of publication. Now, I should also note that if you're going to write an article about whether or not someone is a hero, you really need to describe to your audience what you mean by that. Because the term hero means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I don't think anybody would discount the notion that a person who runs into a burning building and saves a baby from dying is a hero. I don't think that anybody would disagree with that. But then are teachers heroes? Are nurses heroes? Well, I think that they do admirable work. However, the term hero is being used in that sense a lot differently. And I would suggest that a teacher is not a hero. A teacher is a good person doing a difficult job. But whatever the case, Richie McGinniss really needs to outline in this article somewhere what he means by hero, and he never does. So that's one mark against him right there. So let's go ahead and begin here. Before the shooting started at 11:36 p.m. on August 25th, 2020, I ran into Kyle Rittenhouse in front of a gas station and interviewed him for several minutes. Okay, now we already start off with a problem. He says, before the shooting started, you might want to set the stage for your audience. What are you talking about? Not everybody is real privy to the Kyle Rittenhouse saga. So this opening sentence assumes that the reader is already knowledgeable about what took place. Nailing down the time of the night and on which night is really not that important here. I would let that one slide, but if I'm the editor, I would probably rewrite this to where it doesn't become so persnickety. On that evening of August 25th, does it really matter that it was at 11:36 p.m.? He was a 17-year-old kid with a semi-automatic rifle, and he was playing cop surrounded by people who didn't want him there. And this is where we have serious problems. Whether or not he was playing cop, that's a matter of opinion. I've said many, many times that guarding a house at night is not playing cop, because cops don't do that. If you go on vacation and you call them up and say, hey, I'm going to be gone, can you come by and guard my property? They won't do it. They'll laugh at you, and they'll tell you to call what? Private security. And so what was Kyle doing that night? He was playing the role of private security, not police. But that's beside the point. The phrase, he was playing cop, sets off a really negative tone about Kyle from the very get-go. This looks like a hit piece. But let's read on. Surrounded by people who didn't want him there. Wow, what a great opportunity for the writer to lay down some context. What do you mean by that? I could see him writing, I could tell by the sneers on his compadres' faces that they didn't want him there. Provide us something to substantiate your claim and put us, the reader, at the scene. Who were these people? What were they like? Why didn't they want him there? How do you know they didn't want him there? There's a lot that you could explain here, and you never do. So be careful about laying down unsubstantiated comments, especially when those comments allow you to place your reader at the scene. Rittenhouse didn't see it that way. So people are getting injured, and our job is to protect this business. And part of my job is also to help people, he told me. For the third night in a row, half of downtown Kenosha was ablaze. When there's somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. Okay, Richie, what do you think about that? Did you dismiss it? This is outright bragging from a 17-year-old kid who had no business being there? Or were you touched by what he said? This is a kid wanting to help his community. Tell us what his words meant to you. Give the reader, again, some context. In the manner in which he told you this, in the words that he chose, does this tell us a little bit about this kid? You are in the position better than anybody, at least at this time of the night, to tell us, and you didn't even bother doing it. You just quote him on his words. Let's go back. Read past the headline and enjoy this fabulous piece of writing from Richie McGinniss. Really? Fabulous, huh? Okay. All right. And we move on. 13 minutes later, Rittenhouse, standing feet from me, would kill one man. A few minutes after that, he'd kill another. Then he'd maim a third. Okay, we're glossing over a lot here. As a reader, I'm probably thinking, okay, he's going to go into some detail about what he means by this. This is a crucial turning point in the story. We need to know what happened here. This is a self-defense claim. So just to say, well, he then shot some people doesn't provide us enough information to make any judgment. So we're hoping here that we're going to get some context about what he means by this. And we're going to get severely disappointed, but okay. I took off the Black Lives Matter t-shirt I chose that night to blend in with the crowd and used it to staunch the wounds on the first shooting victim, Joseph Rosenbaum. So we're talking now about Joseph Rosenbaum, who, by the way, he calls a victim. That's rather interesting. Kyle is not a hero, but Joseph Rosenbaum is a victim. Stumbling across the street, carrying Rosenbaum with another man, my hand slipped on slippery sweat and blood. Slipped on slippery. Read past the headline and enjoy this fabulous piece of writing from Richie McGinniss. So I'm going to give everybody out there in viewerland a tip. Don't do this. Slipped on slippery. This redundancy is really not good writing. Do whatever you can to avoid this. Go to the thesaurus. Is there a synonym for slipped that you might be able to use, or for slippery? And let's go on. And we nearly dropped him as we loaded him into the rear of a nearby Dodge Durango. All right, I don't know if I care about what the make and model of the SUV is, but whatever. We had to leave the back door, or tailgate, open to make room for both of us. It's a tailgate. Just say we had to leave the tailgate open to make room for both of us. One of my arms was gripping the backseat headrest so I wouldn't fall out, and the other was cradling Rosenbaum's bleeding head and back. Okay, I have no issues with that. Protesters kept trying to climb into the SUV. I couldn't see who was punching me, but the blows kept coming. Richie, Richie, Richie. What blows? What are you talking about? All of a sudden, you just say, I couldn't see who was punching me. Wait, you never even mentioned it. And there's no indication here whether these blows were vicious or not. Did they hurt? Again, give us some details. Put us at the scene. I kicked someone trying, furiously, crazily, to grab onto the rear bumper as we raced to the hospital. And now is where I'm having troubles with image here. I just cannot imagine what's taking place. The back tailgate is open, and you have Rosenbaum laying on it, and you're sitting on the back tailgate along with another person. So there are 3 people on this tailgate. You're racing to the hospital, and you have people trying to climb into the SUV, and a person trying to punch you as you race to the hospital. And we have a person trying to grab onto the rear bumper. How do you grab onto a rear bumper if the tailgate is down? I'm not picturing this. There's something not right here. I mean, when you say race to the hospital, I'm getting images of 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. Okay, maybe since you're going through a city, race means 20, 30. But I don't see people being able to keep up with the car if it's racing to the hospital. Something's not right. And I'm not trying to interrogate Richie on this. What I'm trying to say is that his manner of describing what took place here is very inadequate. When we finally got there, we stopped at the bottom of a ramp leading to the ER. I tried not to cry as we waited for the metal security door to open. Okay, you're trying not to cry, so obviously you're overcome with emotion. Tell us what you mean by that. How do you truly feel? It's going to be okay, bro, I told Rosenbaum. I think bro would be capitalized there, but okay. We're going to have a beer after this and laugh about it. Okay, I have a feeling that Jojo Rosenbaum really didn't appreciate hearing that at that time, but all right. It was hard to hear my voice over the sounds of Rosenbaum struggling to breathe and gargling blood instead. And how did this make you feel? Tell us the trauma that's going on emotionally to you that leads for you to try not to cry. As we pulled up to the hospital, I watched Gage Grosskreutz limp through its doors. A police officer held his butchered arm. It was a mangled mass of flesh and bone. Yeah, arms are typically made out of flesh and bone. Very good. Not fully amputated, but not quite an arm. I didn't know it at the time, but Anthony Huber was lying dead on the pavement just outside the hospital. All 3 of Kyle Rittenhouse's victims, so obviously Kyle is at fault, Rosenbaum, Huber, Grosskreutz, on a little swatch of concrete draped in flashing lights, and that is a fragment. Where is the verb? And yes, fragments are allowed in creative writing, but not like this. This is terrible. Or you could say, all right, all 3 of Kyle Rittenhouse's victims on a swatch of concrete. What about them? The editor should have caught this. I mean, this is atrocious writing. All right, we move on. All 4 of them, Rittenhouse and the 3 men he had shot, were about to be manufactured by the media machine into caricatures of the people they really were. And I don't like that dangling verb of the form to be there. I don't like ending sentences with is, was, were, or whatever, but that's just my personal style. Today marks 2 years since that night. I was there on assignment for the Daily Caller to cover the civil unrest sparked by the shootings of Jacob Blake, a black man shot by a police officer in the wake of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. All right, whatever. In the months after the Rittenhouse shooting, most mainstream reporters and producers immortalized Rosenbaum as a Black Lives Matter martyr, even though he had been caught on camera earlier that day using the N-word. Conservatives called him a pedo, He'd been convicted of having sex with a minor in 2002 who had it coming. And at this point here, the editor may have stepped in. And we don't know what went on between Richie McGinniss and the editor. Richie's original manuscript might have been a lot harsher on Rosenbaum, but the editor of Newsweek is not going to allow that to go. He'll allow some criticism of Joseph Rosenbaum, but he's not going to allow Richie McGinniss to go on and tell the readers of Newsweek what that dude was really like. Not in this article. But then again, maybe Richie wrote it like this, but this is really terrible. Joseph Rosenbaum was not just merely convicted of having sex with a minor. It is far, far more insidious than that. The man was a pervert. The man was a really violent ex-felon. He was a heroin addict, domestic violence abuser, suicidal, a raging lunatic. And Richie describes him as merely a person who was convicted of having sex with a minor long, long time ago. No, Richie, it's far, far worse than that. Now, I know what some people will say, well, that's not relevant. It is relevant here because you're poking criticism at conservatives for calling him a pedo, and therefore you're diminishing their claim artificially. You're not being honest here. Conservatives call him a pedo for far more serious reasons than what you're describing. So at this point, your article is dishonest. Let's move on. Meanwhile, to his detractors, Rittenhouse was a white supremacist vigilante. And to his lionizers, wait a minute, you said meanwhile to his detractors, Rittenhouse was a white supremacist vigilante. Well, I think use of the word meanwhile there was very poorly chosen. You should have left it out. So you could have started off the sentence with, to his detractors, Rittenhouse was a white supremacist vigilante. The left ignored the fact that Rittenhouse had come out that day to clean graffiti. That's all you have to say in favor of Kyle? That's it? The fact that he went there that night to protect property, the fact that he went out on the streets looking for injured protesters to help, that doesn't play a role here at all? It's only that he came out that day to clean graffiti? The left ignored far more than that. The left has even come to the point where they say, well, Kyle may have went out there looking for injured protesters, but he really didn't want to help them. We have him on video helping protesters. We have witnesses on my channel who will tell you about Kyle helping injured protesters. I'm not saying that you have to take a pro-Kyle stance in your article. You can play both sides if you want to, but to relegate Rittenhouse's good deeds to him coming out to clean graffiti is another case of intellectual dishonesty. It moves on. Conservatives, champions of family values, didn't bother to ask why Rittenhouse's family had allowed him to venture out onto the streets of Kenosha in the middle of violent demonstrations in the first place. I don't understand what this has to do with family values. First of all, Kyle's family didn't know he was even there. And this is where I have a real problem with you, Richie. You should know better. This has been 2 years now. You were at the trial. You heard the testimony. You know damn well that Wendy didn't have anything to do with Kyle being there at the protest. So why are you writing this? I have no idea. But again, this has nothing to do with family values. You may disagree whether a kid at 17 should be out protecting property and looking for injured protesters during a violent demonstration, but it's not a family value issue. Now, if Kyle was handing porn out to all the people as he ran through the streets, then you might have a claim. If he was shooting up drugs, you might have a claim. But since when is guarding property and helping injured protesters a violation of family values? I don't get it. It moves on. Nor did they care that he'd lied about being a medic. I don't. I'm a conservative, and I really don't care if he lied about his age or about being a medic. He doesn't owe anybody the truth, unless they're a cop or a judge or somebody with that type of authority. Ryan Balch asked him, what kind of training have you had in medical? And Kyle exaggerated. Okay, he didn't really lie so much as he exaggerated, but he doesn't owe Ryan Balch the truth. Ryan is not a cop. He's not a judge. Kyle is under no obligation to be honest about these things. And let's face it, who amongst us at 17 didn't lie to people? Half the people criticizing Kyle for lying about his age bought liquor with phony IDs. I mean, come on. And it moves on. Nor did they seem to mind that their hero, instead of calling 911, as I'd asked him to do after he shot Rosenbaum, and he's under no obligation to follow your commands, Richie. You're just a videographer out there. You have no better place to be telling others what to do than anybody there. But let's go ahead and read this again. Nor did they seem to mind that their hero, instead of calling 911, as I'd Richie McGinniss asked him to do after he shot Rosenbaum, had fled on foot. All right. I want to ask you, I'll ask everybody out there. You get a phone call from your 17-year-old kid. He's shot somebody at a protest. The protesters are now descending upon the scene. And he asks you, should I stay here and tend to the injured person or run to the police? Gee, what would you advise? Now, I know some of you liberals listening will go, oh, well, I would tell my kid to stay there because that's the right thing to do. Yeah, and after the protesters tear that kid limb from limb, what would you say then? Anybody who would stay at that scene as the protesters descend on the scene is a moron. An absolute 100% grade A moron. Kyle absolutely did the right thing by running to the police. Keep in mind, Richie, you were already there tending to the injured. What could Kyle do? I mean, you're claiming he's not a medic. So why are you expecting him to stay there? What would he do for you if he had stayed at the scene, Richie? As for calling 911, I have explained many times. I even have an entire video on it. When people get into traumatic situations, they often call people that they know. Kyle has shot somebody. He was not expecting to do that night. I don't care what anybody says. This was completely unexpected. He's now panicking a little. He's in serious trouble. Beyond a person possibly dying because of what he did, he's also looking at serious jail term. And so he starts to panic. And when you panic, you call somebody who's going to make you feel better. Somebody who will tell you, look, everything's going to be okay. Here's what you do. He's looking for guidance. And his friend Dominic Black, who he called, is older than him. And you might say, well, why doesn't he call the police? The police aren't going to come. This is a demonstration where the police have essentially roped off the area and allowed the people to just tear the hell out of things. Calling 911 wasn't going to do anything. But regardless, even if calling 911 would have helped, Kyle is not in the mental frame of mind to do so. Richie, you should have called 911. Because you were in the calmer position. You didn't actually do the shooting yourself, but you didn't. And by the way, Richie, I'm going to say something else. I noticed in reading your article that you put this dude into the back of an SUV and you drove him to the hospital. Why didn't you call 911 and have the ambulance come? Because, Richie, you know damn well that they wouldn't have. That's why you had to take him yourself. Your own article exposes your hypocrisy here. Are you not capable of dialing 911? What about the other protesters there? Why couldn't they have dialed 911 and had the cops or the police show up? Because you know that it wouldn't have made a difference. You drove him to the hospital because you knew that was the only way to get him care. And so to blame Kyle for not calling 911 is pretty hypocritical on your part. You didn't call him either. Okay, it goes on. These cartoonish characterizations were just that. Cartoons designed for the algorithm. All right. Everyone and everything was spun through these partisan lenses without regard to contradiction or nuance. Hey, it would be great if you could provide us some nuance. You're saying that there's no nuance here. Well, why aren't you providing it? For example, when you're talking to Kyle earlier and you even quoted him, you provided no context, no nuance about what those words meant to you. Were they from a frightened kid, a boastful kid? What? So I would suggest to you, Richie, that you're fully guilty of this. To give you just one example, soon after the shooting, by the way, I like to put a capital letter after the colon, but that's just personal style. Soon after the shooting, I went on Fox News' Tucker Carlson and shared what I'd seen. Soon after that, CNN's Drew Griffin reported that I'd supported the conservative claim that Rittenhouse acted in self-defense. But there was nothing inherently conservative about that claim. It probably didn't help that I worked for a conservative publication, but Griffin was apparently unaware I'd also worked at MSNBC and Al Jazeera, and in 2020 voted for Kanye West and mushrooms. Okay, enough about that. I immediately emailed Matt Dornick, CNN's head of strategic communications, to make it clear I wasn't towing any party line and asked for a clarification. Wait, I immediately emailed, past tense, Matt Dornick, CNN's head of strategic communications, to make it clear I wasn't towing any party line and ask for a clarification? What? Okay, Grammarly would have caught this. You have trouble with tense. It's asked for a clarification, past tense. Griffin, to his credit, invited me to come on, but when I did, weeks had passed, and viewers' perceptions seemed to have hardened into received wisdom. Rittenhouse could not have acted in self-defense. Okay, a few too many commas, but okay. People appeared tied to an ideologically circumscribed understanding of what had happened. And I agree with him there. A few months later, during the trial, I was called to testify. I tried to be as impartial as I could. When I was asked by defense attorney Mark Richards whether I'd feared for my life, I said yes. One of 4 shots Rittenhouse fired ricocheted off the ground in front of me. When I was asked by prosecutor Thomas Binger how I could have known Rosenbaum's intentions, I said, well, he said, "F you." And then he reached for the weapon. Yeah, we all saw that and laughed. Neither answer was ideological. It was just me trying to report as accurately as possible what had happened. Okay, this is good. I have no problems with this. Then a month after the trial came Turning Point USA's America Fest, which was streamed on Fox Nation. Use of the verb came is really not well chosen here. Avoid it. The organizers invited me to participate. We would like to surprise the audience with Kyle Rittenhouse coming out in person, the invitation said. This will not be announced. Kyle is confirmed. All right, well, were you going to be on stage to greet him? Were you going to come on stage afterwards? Were you even going to be on stage at the same time at all? There's no detail here. I declined. Instead, I watched the segment Kenosha on camera from home. Pyrotechnics exploded before a cheering audience of thousands of self-proclaimed young conservatives as the surprise guest took the stage. Self-proclaimed young conservatives? Yeah, that's kind of true, but why even mention that? They are young conservatives. Are you doubting that? The panelists joked with Rittenhouse about how good his aim was. I felt sick watching them laugh about the man whom Rittenhouse had shot in a used car lot. Okay, that's a perfectly valid, frankly, I kind of felt the same way. I mean, I'm not pro Rosenbaum, but At the same time, I thought that the gallows humor that was going on was a bit much. I mean, I certainly would never have advised that. But here's what happens. He goes on. The guy I promised I'd get a beer with right before they loaded him onto a gurney, and his terrified white eyes turned into a frozen stare. Dude, it's been plenty of time since the trial. You now know Rosenbaum's background. You know that the man is a mad young kid rapist. You know that he's a domestic violence abuser and a heroin addict. And you're still going to hold on to this notion that you promised to have a beer with him? This is at the point where you need to reevaluate your stance. You can still claim making fun of Joseph Rosenbaum's death was ill-advised and, frankly, disgusting. You can make that claim. But at the same point, you have to acknowledge the fact that he was not a good dude. He was a really, really bad dude. Under no circumstances should you reflect back on your promise to have a beer with him. That's just weird, dude. Seriously, that's not good. All right, we move on. It's easy to forget what Kenosha once was. Richie, we're not from Kenosha. Very few of your readers are from Kenosha. We don't know what Kenosha was like. So to claim it's easy to forget what Kenosha once was doesn't make any sense here. All right, a friendly, sleepy town on the banks of Lake Michigan, a little south of Milwaukee, a little north of Chicago. In its glory days, it rivaled Detroit as the nation's automotive hub. By the summer of 2020, it was a shadow of its former self. Like a silent skeleton of happier lives and better times. P.U. Yuck. Don't write like this. Like a silent skeleton of happier lives. It's also easy to forget that the violence was part of a national tsunami that was encouraged, if not outright stoked, by media chieftains in Washington and New York. Kyle Rittenhouse was broadly presented as either a force for good or evil. In my view, he was neither. Okay, but your headline claims he was not a hero, which sort of implies that he's a bad guy. And I understand you didn't say that, but that's what the impression most people are going to have when reading that headline and what you've written so far. Now you're trying to paint him as neutral. Good luck with that. You have basically spent most of your article here slamming him. So tell us what he was like. If he is neither good or evil, tell us about him. What is your impression of Kyle? Is he just a normal kid out there trying to do something good? Is he naive? I mean, this is the point right here where you could have gone on and told us your impressions of that 17-year-old kid that you interviewed that night, and you didn't even bother doing it. This was calamitous for Kenosha. What was calamitous? Let's go back and read. In my view, he was neither good or evil. This was calamitous for Kenosha. So Kyle not being good or evil was calamitous for Kenosha? And here's a little tip for all your readers out there. Be very, very careful about beginning sentences with the word this. It has to be clear what this refers to. And this can happen when you're moving paragraphs around, when you think, oh, this paragraph would fit better up here. You move the paragraph, but now this doesn't refer to the same thing anymore. You have to be really careful about this kind of stuff. I have no idea what this refers to. I suppose it was the national tsunami, but if it does, you should not have interrupted it with your views on whether Kyle was good or evil. All right, we move on. This was calamitous for Kenosha, and above all, for Joseph Rosenbaum, Anthony Huber, and Gage Grosskreutz. By the way, I am a big fan of the Oxford comma, and you're missing it here. But whatever. And in a way, for Kyle Rittenhouse, who remains confined to his media cartoon forever. Now, when I read this sounds like the end of the article. I mean, this would have been a good way to end the article, but it's not. Okay. He goes on. In the summer of 2022, I went back to Kenosha to shoot a documentary about what happened. The goal of the documentary was not that dissimilar to the goal of testifying in a courtroom, piecing together the fragments of the recent past with an eye toward understanding. Okay, here we go. The engine of my rental car rumbled through the broad boulevards, past the 19th century churches. So I'm trying to picture this. We have a street, a boulevard, and I look down the road and here's this engine just rumbling down the street. Okay, here's a little tip. Be very careful about doing this kind of imagery, all right? The engine of my rental car tumbled. You need to place yourself in the rental car before you can make this claim. I stepped into my Mazda RX-7 rental car and headed out. The engine of my rental car rumbled. Now it makes sense. You're in the car and you can hear the engine. Other than that, it does look like an engine just traveling down the street. Read past the headline and enjoy this fabulous piece of writing from Richie McGinniss. Okay. Eventually, I arrived at the scene of the shooting. I tried to retrace my steps. There was no memorial for Rosenbaum or Huber. Should there have been one? Well, that would be something to talk about, wouldn't it? There was no plaque recalling the chaos. Kenosha apparently wanted to forget what had happened. It wanted to go back to the way it had been before the summer of 2020, before the swarm arrived, before #Kenosha trended, before it was engulfed by a brief and indelible madness. Okay, I'm not a big fan of sentence fragments here. These are fragments. I would allow this to go ahead and be published. This is creative writing. It's less formal. If you're writing a technical paper, you don't want to do this. Before the swarm arrived is a fragment. It's not a complete sentence. But again, I don't have a lot of problems with this. It says here, Richie McGinniss is a video director. That's good. Hey, Richie, stay as a video director. Don't go anywhere near writing. You suck at it. Is the article biased? Yeah, it's pretty bad. Again, it's published in Newsweek. And here's something I want everybody to understand as well. If Richie had written in there something terribly negative about the victims, the editor would have probably just deleted it. And Richie might have came back and said, hey, well, what about that statement I made about Rosenbaum? Well, we had to cut that because of space considerations. Do you still want us to publish this article? And they know fully well that the author is going to say, sure, because Richie really wants this thing published. This is Newsweek. This is big time. And so the editor knows fully well that he can strip out anything he wants. Richie's going to go along with it. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why this is so heavily biased against Kyle. Newsweek is not going to publish anything that's pro Kyle. It's simply not. It knows its audience. Go back to the headline. I was in Kenosha 2 years ago. Kyle Rittenhouse is not a hero. Besides the comma there, the editor for Newsweek knows fully well that this is great clickbait. When people on Twitter see this, the editor knows that people are going to say, oh, all right, Kyle Rittenhouse is not a hero. I'm going to retweet this. I'm going to read it. Newsweek's readers want to hear anti-Kyle stuff. They're in arguments. They want good ammunition. And so the editor is going to strip out anything that paints Kyle in too good of a light. So be careful about publishing in these articles, in these journals like The Atlantic and Newsweek. You could write the most balanced treatment that you could ever imagine. And they'll say, this is great. This is what we're looking for. We're going to have millions of readers. You're going to be famous once this hits the stands. And you're going to be thinking, all right, this is wonderful. You're going to go out to dinner, you're going to celebrate, and then you're going to get the email. We had to strip out certain things, though. And you might object. And they're going to say, look, I mean, this is what we're planning on publishing. Do you want to sign off or not? And you've already invested the time. You've already invested your emotions to having the thing published. And you're going to go along with it. It happens. Like my videos, subscribe to my channel, and Richie, stay away from the laptop keyboard by all means. You're not good at this.